workshop for the general and capital funds workshop to order. Is there any, did you want to sit, you can sit over here.
I tried.
This is not, like, you don't need to be sworn in. If you want to.
I will.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, team, we can go ahead and get started.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, board. Excited today to present our first draft version of the operating and capital funds budget. As you're all very well aware, we are a little bit in limbo in terms of our leadership teams right now. So I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of my vision for this workshop, and obviously we're here to talk about anything that you guys want to talk about. So what we've prepared for you, I see a few of you looking at this one-page handout. So this is an update on ARC, which we were going to address at the end. But the packet that we've prepared for you is the format you're used to seeing for our general and capital funds budget as far as a first draft of where we are today. And there is some discussion I'd like to have and feedback that we'd like to get both from the board today as well as in the very near future with Dr. Shanoff and the team over the next couple of weeks as we continue to work through some of the budget planning and finalize what we really want the budget for this upcoming school year to look like. So, with that said, I did want to give Dr. Shanoff an opportunity. Did you want to start off with anything?
Well, I'm excited to be here, and I just want to say thank you to Sarah and her team for the work that they've done to pull this together. This is obviously the beginning of the process, and so looking forward to all the information that you're going to be sharing with us and advising the board on how we move forward and answering their questions and getting us to a point where we can adopt the budget. So, thank you.
All right, so just to flip through this quickly, obviously table of contents, intro. If you go to page I-2, we have the timeline there, and again, the highlighted lines are the workshops and meetings that the school board will be involved with. So we're here today on June 27th having our workshop, and then we'll come back to you at the July 11th school board meeting with the superintendent's proposed tentative budget. And at that time, it's just an information item. Continue to get some feedback if there's anything that we want to tweak before we then bring forward the full budget document for the 2 required public hearings that will take place on August 1st and then the final on September 5th. So that's the timeline we're working through. The next page just gives you the historical growth of our student counts. Obviously, everybody knows about the growth here in Osceola. If you look down in the bottom right, though, you'll see our projection for the upcoming year, including traditional schools, charters, and the Family Empowerment Scholarships. With House Bill 1 expansion, we are forecasted to have 79,466 full-time equivalent students for next year is the current projection, which is a 4.27% increase. The next 2 pages is just the breakdown of that by school. You can see the change in the right-hand column, some ups and downs. So we work with Rhonda and the Planning Services Department and the principals to really break this down and see what do we think our projections are going to be at each individual school level. And that's how we've allocated our instructional positions initially going into the year. Then we'll look at who shows up in August, go through our day 10 tweaks, and adjust our allocations accordingly at that point. On the second page of that at the bottom, though, you can also see where our family empowerment numbers are there. So we are projected to grow just under 1,000. Again, we'll see where that ends up once we get into the fall. And we do have 765 FTE sitting there as undistributed. So that just means we have not actually allocated teachers for those kids until we see where and if they show up.
I have a question real quick, I'm sorry. On I-4, because I know that Island Village is coming, this is starting this year?
Yes.
And they're only projected to take 500 students?
That is the projection. I don't know.
Because is it not open all
Anything else?
levels? Is it one of those things where it's a phased growth, where it's only like having K1 and 2 or something like that, or?
So it
Rhonda,
is
do you wanna speak to that?
opening all grades. However, we open it a little on the lower side because as the island village itself is continuing to grow, we want the seats to be available for the students from Island Village. So we created the boundary with the intent not to have to reduce it to back students back out.
Because, and the reason the kind of, West Side K is still at 1,600 students, I think it's ginormous. Are we trying to pull as much as, because if we have that much what is the capacity of
So,
Island Village?
one of the things we opted to do, we were unsure if one of the charter schools was going to open on time this fall. So there is, with the current understanding, they are going to come in, but they're gonna open just in a different facility possibly. So that number for West Side should reduce by another 300 to 400 because they have that many of our students tentatively enrolled to go over to the new charter school. So we see West Side dropping down more around 1,300.
Okay. That's good.
What is the time frame for Island Village to become to get to capacity?
At that point, they'll just be at the rate that Island Village itself is growing. So we figure 2 to 3 years before they'll be fully at capacity, in addition to any choice students that we are taking into the facility.
So we allow people to out of zone into it? If it only opens up at 5, can we like encourage it and say, hey, West Side K, it's like, here's an opportunity to go to a brand new school, you know what I mean? Do we want to try to promote the students on their own to move over to the new school?
Some can choice in, but we don't want to fill it up with students because then as
The population
The
grows around the area.
population
Yeah, that's what I'm
grows,
saying, you
we
don't have to
need to
fill it
have
up
the
completely,
availability,
but if we can at
so.
least alleviate 100 or 200 students from West Side, to try to, see if
That
they,
is where the bulk of the students came from that are going into Island Village. With, primarily did really West Side. So West Side would be closer to 2,000 had we not done the redistricting.
wow,
And the
because the
opening
growth
of
is just,
Island Village. So we are beginning to move their portables out this year. They have put in 3. So we have some coming out this summer and we'll take out more once we see the full impact of the charter school in the fall.
thank
Okay. Moving on, the next page, I-6 is just the estimated taxable value as of May 31. So we're waiting for the taxable value to be certified on July 1st. So we should have that by the end of the week. And then if that gross taxable number value goes up or down, that's what the Department of Education will take into effect when they issue the second FEFP calculation in mid-July. And that will change our FEFP numbers for the final version. The next page is a history of our tax millage and levy. And you can see at the top the millage rates. We do have you guys are all well aware of the required local effort rate that has gone down over the last several years. So you can see that there at the top, in the top right, 3.321 is the RLE right now as of the first calculation of the FEFP. Again, once the taxable value is certified on July 1, that will then get adjusted to make sure that we're able to generate the same level of local funding as was planned for in the conference report. So that number should be expected to change when the second calc comes out. And then in addition to that, we have our 0.748 discretionary and our 1.5 mils for capital. And you can see down at the bottom the percentage increases. So we are expecting the tax roll to increase just under 18% based on what we have right now. The next page is the FEFP comparison to the current year that you all are used to seeing. Also on the page right after that, since the FEFP format changed so substantially this year, went ahead and included for you the somewhat new format that the state has pushed out, showing which categoricals are now being rolled into the base, so I think it's a little bit easier to look at. You can really see that picture of how funding compression, instructional materials, reading, teacher supply money, and turnaround are all no longer their own categorical. So when you look at this, all of the funding associated with those areas will still apply. The requirements will still apply. We still have to have a reading plan. We will still have to execute the teacher supply money. But those particular categorical buckets of money do not exist the same way that they did in the past. So that money is sitting up in the base allocation now.
But is there still like Safe Schools, ESE, are those categoricals still?
Yes, so,
active?
yep, if you look at page 1-9, yeah, it's a little bit easier to look at it in this format. So you can see those that are not highlighted still exist.
Oh, so the highlighted ones are the ones that get
The
rid of.
highlighted ones, yeah, in that first column is the 22-23 year, so that's how much we got in the current year. And there will be nothing, no actual dollar amount assigned to those going into next year.
Right.
Also, the other thing is the teacher salary increase money. That's a little bit quirky how they've done that now, so that is also your second line there in italics, kind of in that middle section. It's in the base funding, but within the base funding, they have carved out the specific dollar amount per district to be spent on teacher salary increases. Let's see what else on here.
Can you talk for a minute about the TJJ supplement allocation, how it's going down from last year to this year?
Actually, I can look into that, but I am not an expert on that one.
Okay.
So, but yeah, we can certainly dig a little deeper and see what's going on there. I think, Jose, are you aware of anything specific?
Well, just off the top of my head, I would imagine part of that is just a reduction in enrollment in those programs, not just the overall funding.
Yeah, because understand that the state's gonna take that over or can have a charter school allocated or something like that.
Charge will take over it.
They're gonna take over that.
Can take over that program.
So
You guys
would
may
that,
know
would
more
that,
than I
would that
do.
categorical go away altogether?
No one knows that except for the three of us. I've asked several people.
Yeah. So I didn't know how that was gonna impact the budget. Is that
Yeah.
just gonna be as a pass-through, just like we do with the other
In
charges we hold?
Osceola County or?
No, the whole entire state.
They're taking,
Well,
charter schools
You're
are
saying
taking.
no, she's saying yes.
No, yeah.
Oh, the whole
charter-
state.
The
Okay.
whole state. I don't know which charter, it's a charter, not a school, whatever company is taking over that program. Doesn't seem that news has come to us yet.
I may have heard some.
Yeah.
About it, but clearly they haven't
Yeah,
changed any
yeah.
of this yet, so, okay.
Yeah,
We
because
will
that
look into
allocation,
that
because
further.
that allocation looks small anyway, because that doesn't include all of our teacher salaries and everything with DJJ. That sounds like what, just like materials for the DJJ program itself, or?
Right, it's just a supplemental allocation, so those FTE are included in the base funding as well, for those DJJ programs, but this is supplemental funding.
Oh, to cover it, okay. So like the teacher salaries for DJJ are included in the base FEFP.
Correct.
And this is just
On
additional
top of
funding on
their
top of that. Correct.
Yeah, we'll definitely look into that further, see what we can find out. Let's see, class size, went down a little bit, but anything else on here we wanted to point out?
Just the change from the traditional DCD to account for the
Ah.
wage factor, which only will apply to those districts that are over one. So in the past, where that resulted in a reduction of funding for our district, that's set at 1 going into next year.
And if you look back, so, yeah, so our DCD last year, or current year, was .987, which is, we've kind of been right around that .98 something. So we were losing about $4.5 million from that. However, if you all remember the last several years, we've been getting that extra funding compression money, which somewhat offset that for our district. The amounts are all over the board statewide. But for our district, the dollar value of that somewhat offset the loss from our less than one district cost differential. So those two things changing at the same time is kind of a wash for us in terms of the net dollar amount.
Thank you.
But you all understand what happened with the DCD, so it's now called the comparable wage factor, and anyone less than 1.00 is held to 1.00. So the
That's
districts
standard
that are.
now?
Yes, yeah, that all changed this year. So the districts that had a DCD greater than 1 will still receive the benefit of that, but everybody's minimum, the floor is now 1.
Do you mind, like, just saying for the public to know, because I know we had a constituent reach out and say, hey, the acronyms, I don't really know what this is, so like the DCD.
DCD was district cost differential.
Yes, thank you.
Which, again, they've changed the terminology now. It's still the same exact calculation. So the data that drives what that number has not changed. They've just changed how it's referred to, from district cost differential to comparable wage factor.
Thank you.
Next page again is just some historical graphs showing our really growth in funding, and then growth in our revenue per student. And so you have those numbers and those percentages there. And then the next page, I-11, I know we always monitor closely our rank in per student funding. And so as of this calculation, we are 65th out of 67. And I'll just caution everyone again, there are many, many different variables that go into this total per student, average per student funding number. So with a lot of the changes in the FEFP this year and with the family empowerment expansion, there are a lot of new variables in here that'll continue to sort of change this formula. But I know everybody always wants to know where we are. We're going to stay kind of around there. I mean, if you look at how close some of them are, 63, 64, 65, 66 are all, it can change, depending on one tiny little tweak within the formula, or also depending on our program weights. So some districts have a much higher ESE prevalence rate than others. Also now with the private school vouchers, everybody has a different percentage of ESE students that have heavier weighted funding. So all of that can change.
Yeah, but we have a high ESOL population though, compared to most counties
We
too.
do,
You would think
we
that
do.
would not.
ELL is not weighted quite as high, but yeah, all of that goes into, this is just a total average per student funding. So it doesn't mean that all of our students are funded at that dollar amount. That's truly an average.
But if you were to take out our special programs, then that number would be much less. Right, because we have a much higher percentage of ELL, right? I would imagine that we're also higher in ESE for Dillard districts.
Not necessarily.
We're about the same, the average or mean or what?
I mean, I did a ton of research on that a few years ago, but I have to pull current data. It also has to do with our matrix levels and, how we're coding students, what funding's being generated for them, what services we're providing. And there's opportunity, I'm just looking at Dr. Shanoff, there is some opportunity there as well. We have looked at that over the last several years, and we feel like there is probably still some opportunity there to look at how we're coding matrix levels differently and make sure that we're capturing the maximum amount of funding that we should be capturing for each student.
Yes, based on the services that we're providing students, we want that matrix to match. And so, yeah, I agree. It's not a one-to-one when you look at the amount of ESE population within your district. It really does depend on the matrix level of each individual student before you can make a determination as to how much you're actually generating. Because certainly a student who's generating FTE at a 255 level is actually generating it at 4 times what somebody at a 251 level may be, a student at the 251 level may be generating it at. So It's not a one-to-one comparison.
So we want to make sure if we truly are providing like 254 level services, that we are capturing that funding that that child's entitled to.
Is there a higher weight on a specific program? So let me explain what I mean. So let's say that there's a student that is both ELL and ESE. Which one of those takes precedence, or do we
higher
get
weight.
funding for? Okay.
Yeah.
So it is probable that there are students who are not funded for specific programs because the higher weight is what they're funded for. Do you know what I mean?
So, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, if a student's ELL and ESE, and the ESE weight is higher, they'd be funded at the ESE weight, correct?
'cause they're gonna
Okay,
be-
that was my understanding.
But we still provide the ELL.
But we still
service.
provide all the
We still provide extra
services.
services, we're not getting the full funding
Right.
for it, because they're getting fully funded for their ESC component of what they
Right,
need.
correct.
But not the
Good point.
ELL, we're
Versus
absorbing.
a child that only is ESC or only EL and not both,
Correct.
how that would work. for that funding.
But we're still generating more funding than that base funding.
Right.
For students that's needed.
You're saying
ESE or ELL.
you're having to provide that much additional service for that child.
Correct, but that's why we're so low. So when we talk about our priorities for next year and our funding, talking about maybe that formula, because that categorical is super high for us. We have high EL, because I can't imagine, Gulf County has more ELL students than us.
But that's only part of the formula.
Right, there's
So
more things that factor into why they're higher.
But that's a legislative concern, right, to go back and say we need more funding for the ELO portion.
That are both.
Because it's
That are
different
both.
here
Or
and
when they're
it's not
categorized
average.
as two things and not getting,
yeah,
Yeah, there should be like a higher
funding for
factor
all the
that are
services
both.
they're provided.
yeah, that's definitely a legislative priority to think about.
And some of those districts at the top of the list, I mean, those are districts with a higher tax base, higher cost of living,
Yeah.
and they're benefiting from the comparable wage factor over one going into their funding as well.
Right. Sarah, I know you've done this at least for me before, but do you think that you can provide, either of you, the categorical formula? Like what goes into all of this? I think you did that for me once. Yeah, because then we can actually tackle parts of that formula to be more intentional about
What I'll
our.
do is I'll wait until the second calc comes out in mid-July.
Yeah.
And then I'll do it off of those numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, we
Yeah.
did it pretty extensively, and went through that whole, some of you may have been here, then we
I
went through
think it
that
was just
whole
me.
exercise with Jim Hamilton. and, it may have just been you back this time. So, yeah.
It was 2 years ago, I think,
What?
actually, we did that.
Oh,
During the
Were you
legislative.
here during part of that? Okay.
Just kidding.
So, we did it 2 years in a row, so they may have been here the second year.
Yeah, yeah.
But yes, no, that's a good idea. We'll update that whole thing again. And basically what she's talking about is taking, this number's on a per student basis, so taking every component of the FEFP formula and breaking it down for all 67 districts on a per student basis so that we can truly compare every bucket of funding by district on a per student basis to see what's really driving this.
The difference.
And we know, I mean, the majority of it is property values, right? So higher property value districts. Also smaller districts, you're gonna see a lot of the smaller districts at the top because on a per student basis, all of their like minimum funding, all their overhead, administration is gonna be, it's gonna look like they're spending more on a per student basis. So those are the districts you're typically gonna see closer to the top. Central Florida is typically closer to the bottom because we haven't benefited from, beachfront property values. And we haven't historically benefited from sparsity. We're not one of the small districts. We don't, all of the individual components within the formula that help benefit other districts, we really don't participate in. So that's why that's kind of the why behind a lot of our related districts are closer to the bottom when you look at it truly on an average per student funding. All right. Okay, so moving into the general fund, page 1-2 is our one-page general fund budget summary. We have done our preliminary fund balance projection for where we think we're going to end the current year. And so that's what we're starting with here at the top on line 9, beginning fund balance of $88.5 million. And on the next page, we'll talk a little bit more about the long range. But then this kind of goes through the major categories of our revenues and our appropriations. And so we always kind of point out, if you jump to line 36 down there under appropriations, we always say it, about 80 to 85% of our budget is spent on salaries and benefits. And you'll see line 36 is the 64%. But because we have over 20% of our district is sitting in charter schools, all of that money that goes out the door to charter schools is in line 37, and so that's a large part of the salary number as well. So if you think about 80% of that charter school number is salaries in addition to line 36.
What's on the carryover appropriations? Because it's pretty significant.
So carryover appropriations are things where we have allocated money for specific reasons, but the actual expenditure or cash has not gone out the door as of June 30th. So for example, contracts that have been executed where the project hasn't been completed. I always use the textbook example. Money is allocated for an upcoming textbook adoption. Those textbooks will come in July or August for the next year. That can be $10+ million. So those types of things where money has been allocated for something and that money needs to stay there for that specific reason, but it may happen after June 30th. And so then at the bottom where we show the projected ending fund balance of $48 million, it's really, the way you want to think about it is really that $48 million plus the amount that would then carry over into the next year for that same reason that I just explained. And so if you look at the next page, this kind of gives you the picture over time, and the highlighted column again is our proposal for next year's budget. So as of right now, we're showing the increase in per student funding of just over 4%, and that's per the conference report. And then what we're showing, this budget right now is showing that we're projecting a deficit next year of $3 million. So if you look at line 5, operating surplus deficit, the -3, what that represents is that we are planning to spend down fund balance by $3 million in next year's budget. So that's definitely something that we want to talk about and understand why this was put together the way it was and the strategy behind that, and if that's what we want to do. Because this is the time to it doesn't have to be this way. This is just what we had talked about last year and in previous budget planning sessions. About building fund balance up, and if you look back at 2021, you'll see we increased by $11 million that year. So the strategy had been, as moving into the CARES, SRR, post-COVID world, all this federal money, all this federal grant money was coming in for a few years. So some of the things that we were able to do, we were able to kind of save some of the money on the regular general fund side in anticipation for when all of this extra federal money goes away. We don't want everything we're doing to just have to stop immediately on day one, and that's where you hear people talk about a fiscal cliff or a funding cliff, is you want to kind of ramp up and ramp down strategically. So this is what we had talked about previously, was that this upcoming year, we would start to spend that down a little bit, with the majority of it then being utilized in the following year when our ARP dollars go away. And part of this also, we have provided our offers out to all bargaining groups right now for salary increases for next year. So part of that, in order to get to the offers that we did, is acknowledging that we want to go ahead and start spending some of this down. Even though it's not on a recurring basis, we are continuing and will continue to look at opportunities for where we can shift dollars from things that we're currently doing to put into salary increases. So, and that's one thing I'm very excited. Once Dr. Shanoff's on board, we've already had some preliminary conversations about areas to dig a little deeper into and maybe think about things a little differently for how to reprioritize some of what we're doing. So obviously with the board's ultimate goal of shifting what we can into salary increases and putting that money in the classroom. So if everyone's still kind of on board with this strategy, this is what we'll continue to build the budget based on.
On 1.4, because I remember having this conversation before when we were redoing the website. Because I know there was a lot of money to build it, but now that we're building it, and now we're just like in maintenance mode, I don't feel comfortable spending $151,000 on maintaining the website. At that point, we should just almost hire a full-time web designer for $60,000 a year to be able to maintain that, and that's $100,000 right there. 'Cause
What does the maintenance mean? What is broken down into that 151?
I would have to pull the detail on that. I don't know
Yeah.
if Dana's around or if anybody else can speak to that. Or Pete, do you know?
So part of that is software maintenance for Blackboard is in that, as well as content management. So the Blackboard system is full of content that has to be maintained. So that's where that number's coming from.
There's somebody.
Right, they're hosted.
The
And
hosting?
it's not just our website, it's every school's website. So
Correct.
we purchase it for the district, which has all of the departments and everything,
That's right.
plus all
Heather,
schools.
you know this very well.
Well, can I get a detail on that then? Can I get a detail on that line
Yeah.
item? What exactly it's covering?
Yep.
But preliminarily, this is all of our websites that are being hosted at this? Okay. And content management?
Yep. we can
Because
certainly-
is it hosted on our server, or are we leasing it from like somebody else's server?
That's in the cloud.
I know it's in the cloud, but who owns the server itself? You know, it's like I have GoDaddy, it's in the cloud, but we can have it, is it hosted locally on our servers?
It's Blackboard.
Theirs.
Blackboard.
Can we get the actuals? Can we get this same worksheet with the actuals from the
What was
previous year?
actually spent in the current
Yep.
year? Yes, as we close the year out, then that's what we'll bring back, once everything's finalized for this year, so we can bring that back to you next time.
So there's a couple of things that I have questions on that might be worthy of discussion here. There are some things that could be kind of redundant too, and it's just, I'd like extra time, and I'd like to see, or what even what was spent the previous year then, the last closed out the date, you know? The previously closed out.
Yeah, we will put that together.
So our legal fees went up $250,000 over the last time I think I saw this. Our lobbying efforts are at 156, plus we have a legislative consultant at $18,000. But we removed one of the contracts most recently for 60 a year. But that's still a higher, you know, that's still more, so.
The actuals come, it's after summer, right? Okay.
But we can pull.
Okay.
We'll pull current.
I mean, so
just
who
don't-
are we
I just
in-
don't want to give you a report of current that's not really complete, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, we can,
Yeah, so who are we planning on paying $156,000 to? I mean,
can you pull up the detail of some of these line items while we're sitting
Yep.
here? And pull that up.
that wasn't our share to Olay, certainly. And if we remove $60,000 from that line item previously,
We'll pull up the detail. I just don't remember off the top of my head what all's in each line item.
I think I'll just email you, that way it doesn't
Yeah,
have the long.
if you have
coordinated stuff.
specific ones that you want us to pull detail on, definitely if you can let me know, then we'll bring that back or make sure you guys get the detail.
So on our lobbying efforts, 60,000 of that is Olay. And then the other 96,000 is just a placeholder, so it's lobbying services pending an RFP.
So we had talked previously about,
Then
about
we have the
potentially doing an RFP.
18,600
We
for-
will need to talk with the board, though, about the direction that we want to move forward, obviously, as we have discuss legislative priorities and lobbying moving forward.
Because that's just recommended, that doesn't mean that we actually have to spend it.
Correct,
So,
correct.
yeah, because right now we have Olay, and then we have Jessica, Rutledge is saying.
Rutledge is sending out.
Yeah, and that was like 30-something thousand a year, and then like 60, so that's like 90. Because
Yeah,
before
so
we
as
had.
you said,
yeah.
we just, from a budget perspective, we want to make sure that if you all end up wanting to use other lobbyists, that we've already kind of thought through
So-
and placed that money aside.
Let me make the following request then. Then the last closed out year already, just for the sake of time. And then also with what was projected that year. So let's say if we go back to 2021, whatever was projected for that year or recommended in this same format, and then whatever was the actual expenditure.
Yep. And we can pull that together. We've kind of shown this in different ways at different times throughout the year, so happy
that
to
may
pull all that
already-
together.
That may already be in our final budget for the current year.
Okay.
We always look back at the prior year and provide those actuals.
I'll also email you once I receive that, so I can just look at it.
Yeah, any that you want to better understand the detail behind, just if you let us know, we'll make sure we pull all the detail. Okay. So moving on, page 1-6, we just have a couple pages in here of specific categoricals and specific areas of funding to
Sarah,
highlight.
I apologize. If I
Yeah.
can just go back, this is for future reference for the line item allocations. You have under division admin, the name of the of the admin and then the admin. Can you just put the department name?
Yes, we
and
talked,
then-
we talked about changing
Okay.
that
Thank
moving
you.
forward, yes. So we don't have individual names that are constantly changing, and so we don't have individuals' names in our
Yeah.
public documents.
Right.
So, yes, we will make those changes to department names. Okay, so, this next page is the educational enrichment funding, so didn't mention it before, but what was formerly known as SAI, or Supplemental Academic Instruction. So this is now referred to as the educational enrichment funding categorical. And what this page will show for you, the total dollar amount, the 19 million at the top, that ties back to the FEFP calculation page. So that categorical, this is the breakdown of how we plan on using that money. And the main categories are, on line 10 there, you can see how much we're spending on salaries. So we're using this to fund some of our regular classroom salaries, as well as some reading coaches. We have separate money for reading, but we are funding more reading coaches than we have specific reading dollars for. So some of those extra reading coaches' salaries are coming out of this allocation, along with the impact lab teacher salaries. And then the whole section on the bottom half of the page is the non-salary, so other areas that are receiving funding from this allocation.
This is a recurring allocation?
As long as the legislature continues to include it. So, it has been, but yes, it's a part of the FEFP formula. That's subject to whatever they do each year. So, and just, I mean, this has all been vetted by our team, but as we move forward, another area to just continue to dig deeper and look closer at, if there's anything we want to change or reprioritize to do differently. The next page is the reading categorical allocation, and so kind of laid out the same way, how much we're spending on salaries in that area, and that's all going towards reading coaches, and then some of the other things, non-salary that we're funding out of our reading money. And We are required to submit a reading plan. I believe that has already been submitted. Okay. Okay. So that would include the detail behind what's here.
Coaches are coming out of 2 categories.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Next page is mental health. Again, the same thing. It's the total dollar amount of the categorical. And kind of showing how we've spent that with the majority of salaries down there at the bottom, along with our contracted services. And again, I think there's a specific mental health plan that has to be filed with the state.
Yeah.
So that would be all the detail behind how we're using those dollars.
And on the next one for the safe schools, when I look at I-8 and 9 for the total, like when you look at mental health, it showed on I-8 is 4,000,008, right? And then I-9, it shows mental health is 4.8. And then on this page, it's 4.8. When I look at the safe schools though, it says 5.4 on the conference report. But then on I-9, it shows. Okay. So is that the difference then? So if the fourth calculation is not what we're gonna be receiving, it's the 2024
The
conference.
2024, yeah, the 2023 fourth calculation was the year that we just closed out.
Okay,
Yeah, so the second column, the 2024 conference report is next year's budget right now.
okay. All right. And that's why we start off on this page with the 5.4, because that's what we're
Yes.
estimating for it to be.
That's what we're gonna be funded at for next year.
Okay.
And this year's funding will be fully expended. There won't be any safe schools funded left at the end of the year.
But are we, again, what was the expenditure on? Because that's a pretty difference. I mean, 4.5, it's almost $1 million extra. What was the plan on for that extra? Or,
So in previous years, we needed the safe schools allocation plus a line item to cover the cost of all of our SROs on the safe school activities. Going into next year, because of the increase, the line item's not necessary, and we're able to cover all of that.
oh, because you were
Just the
saying
safe
we were
schools
subsidizing it before. So you're saying,
Correct.
so now the allocation itself,
It's gonna
It's gonna cover the bulk
cover
of it.
what we've negotiated with our law enforcement agencies and the number of SROs.
That's the reimbursement that we're giving them back.
yeah, because I know the county helps us, but the county doesn't give us the money directly. They give it directly to like the sheriff's office, so they don't give it to us. So within our
So
allocation.
this is our
we pay
negotiated
the
rate that the
5.5.
school district has to pay.
Correct.
As Jose said, previously, we subsidized it, so we would use the full safe schools allocation from the state, and then we also had a supplemental line item for the additional amount that we needed to put into safe schools and into our SROs. But because, due to the increase in the allocation this year, it just so happened
It
that
fits within-
it just about covered exactly what we were already planning on doing anyway.
In our school hardening, like our front offices and things like that, did that come out of this or?
That's all in capital.
Capital.
Yes. And then obviously the big one that's on our agenda tonight too is, might as well talk a little bit about it now. Well, I guess we'll discuss it later. Is I noticed that the Kissimmee KPD threw in a Guardian floater in there on line item number 36. So that's something that, I don't even know how that's possible, because I didn't know KPD can arm up a Guardian. I thought the Guardian was not an employee of the police department, it's an employee of the school district. So I'm not exactly sure how they physically, I mean, like, literally, how did they even do that? And number two is, obviously, I don't want to, and the Guardian costs more than the SRO. And
Is that for a charter school?
oh, that's for our-
I know Noble is not
Wait,
here. Is anybody in the?
Lester?
Yeah,
Okay, so
Lester.
what KPD did is they hired on the privatized Guardian like they did in the charter schools. So KPD contracted with Eagle Global to hire a Guardian to take care of a float for them because they did not have the manpower. They were unable to hire manpower, so that contract is what they contracted with that private company. They can legally do it as long as that person is a trained guardian. much like what our charters do right now, as hiring guardians through a contract, also through private security companies.
But to Ms. Castillo's point, because part of this is the charter school allocation that we give to them, is that floater allocated to the charter schools and not be a floater to our public schools?
He's floating our public schools when there is a person that is being pulled out of that school for court or something other, like a SWAT team member that has to go. He goes and fills in momentarily until they can get someone else there. Because we have to have coverage from bell to bell. So if he has to pull a person, say they have to go to court, he's going in and filling in until they can get a replacement there to it, where there is no absence of coverage.
So two issues on that. Number one is, are they contractually able to do that with us? Because I don't remember that being part of the contract. Number two, it would be against our policy that we have, that was school board policy. I know that's not on
Because
you.
we haven't,
That's
we
not
haven't,
on you.
we haven't allowed guardians on campus.
Yeah, that's not on you,
then
obviously.
now
I'm just
they can-
saying that they would be breaking school board policy without coming to the school board first. And maybe I'm mistaken, but if I remember the contract correctly, that wasn't allowed.
As far as the contract, I would have to hear back to Frank on the contract coverage. On that, I'm just knowing that's what they've done this year.
Roger.
The reason for, and Ms. Castillo, you asked about the price. We roughly pay a little bit around half of what a deputy costs and everything. That contracted price for them to have that guardian, we're paying basically a portion of that guardian cost. I'm not exactly 100% sure, but that's what I'm anticipating to be. Does that answer your question?
Well, we're gonna have to negotiate that tonight, because that's not,
Well, I mean, I certainly
I mean, it's
understand
not
why
for
they're
here.
doing
Because
it.
it's on the board meeting agenda tonight, you know.
Oh, yeah, we can talk about it. I don't know if we can get a representative to come here. They have time to do that.
I mean, we need to refer to the contract.
Well,
Because
Yes.
when it came up, I wanted to talk to the board about it tonight.
I'm sorry?
When the contract came up tonight for approval, I wanted to talk about the changes to the board.
Yeah, I understand, because the conversation about having coverage, I say manpower, SRO could be a woman. Sorry, I'm being sassy. The conversation about coverage has been a consistent issue and a consistent conversation that we've had with all of our partners. So I understand why. I guess my question is why this wasn't a conversation before it was put into the contract.
Right.
Get it? Yeah, but I would have,
Yeah, it was kind of slipped in, because then, we don't have that floater issue with the city of St. Cloud. We don't have that floater issue with the sheriff, which has more things. And, City Kissimmee just kind of slipped that in. But I guess we'll discuss that later.
thank you.
That has nothing to do with finance department, though.
I wasn't part
That
of
is,
the negotiating
that is not you,
but I
Sarah.
was asking Representative Bacher to look at that, and so we can see you guys can speak to it tonight.
Nothing to do with you. So, just,
Melinda's has given us a preview of what's coming.
yes.
All right. So yes, so that's good news though, that the safe schools allocation has increased to cover our contracted needs for this year. And with that is all we had on the operating budget. So unless there's anything else that you guys want to have discussion about before we move into capital.
No, but just team FYI, I do have a hard stop at 4. Doesn't mean anything to y'all. Just gonna let you know I may be slipping out.
Before you leave, is there anything else you specifically wanted to address in the workshop? Okay.
I'm good.
All right, so moving into capital, I'm gonna have you go ahead and flip to page 2-3. 2-2 is just a summary. So 2-3 is all of our capacity, and most of you have seen this format before. But for Dr. Shanoff's benefit, just at the top, kind of have this laid out. Beginning balance, revenues, and then all of the appropriations laid out for the 5-year plan. So you'll see there under estimated revenues, we have our impact fee forecast set for next year at $82,400,000. Right now in the current year, our forecast was 80, and with 2 months left to be recorded, we were at 75. So I think we're kind of exceed our impact fee revenue forecast for the current year. So we continually look at this with our business advisory board. Every month, we go over what our impact fee revenue collection's looking like, both impact fees and sales tax. And so at our next meeting, we'll again talk with the advisory board about here's what's come in, do we want to update these numbers and update this forecast as far as the revenue side. So there's some potential there. And then our major projects that are in our plan right now, of course, as you are all well aware, Kindred, Knightsbridge, Roan Bridge, Sunbridge, the Neo City expansion, Celebration Island will be opening this fall, and then the new high school on Nova Road. So that's what's funded currently. And then as we start looking out, you'll see in year 4 and 5, we don't have any new school projects slotted in there yet. We'll continue to, work through. We obviously have needs upcoming, but we usually hold off until we get a little bit closer to see kind of what new charter schools open, what else develops, what's going on with enrollment, development, et cetera.
Is our transportation depots aren't considered
So-
new growth, or that has to be under sales tax?
Can be, but we have been using our quarter penny sales tax for our transportation needs. So we have, I will back up just for a second since you asked that question. So our major capital funding sources, of course, are impact fees, which are for new growth, the 1.5 capital millage, which is much more flexible, but we can talk about all the things that goes to fund. And then we have the half penny sales tax and our quarter penny sales tax. So as we communicated to the voters, we have been prioritizing our half penny sales tax program for deferred maintenance, comprehensive renovations, and then we can also use that funding source for safety and security needs and technology infrastructure needs. So the half penny is primarily addressing deferred maintenance and the upcoming comprehensive renovations and funding the gateway renovation right now. The quarter penny, also some flexibility in there for deferred maintenance, capital needs, but we have been prioritizing that on the transportation side, especially over the last year or so, as we've talked about the transportation facilities and the need for more buses at a quicker replacement cycle. I think we finally, just this year, funded to get rid of all the non-air conditioned buses. So we have put in some more money to kind of ramp up how much we're going to allocate each year towards that. But so that's why there's what we can legally spend each funding source on, and then there's kind of our strategies around what we want to use for what.
Can I pull out just one?
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of the Harmony Middle School. I know it's a smaller amount, but it's still there for capital.
That is probably closing out the final construction audit. That's
Okay,
fine. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say, yeah, what can you buy for $11,000?
So all of our
Water
major capital projects, we have a CPA firm go in and do a
Okay.
final construction audit review of them, and so that typically happens, a year or two after the project's completely closed out before that really gets finalized. So that money, that's most likely based on that dollar amount, that's what's still sitting there. It's just final closeout. And I was also going to mention, between now and September, when you'll approve the final budget of this, we're continuing to still close out the current fiscal year. And so that'll be closed out, probably mid to late August before everything's done and settled. And so part of what you'll see change here, what's sitting in carryover, as things continue to get expended, as we continue to get all the June bills in, the pay applications on some of these larger projects, those expenditures will hit, and then that carryover will get reduced. So these numbers obviously are not final until we have everything paid for through June 30th. So on the capital side, some of that can be larger, like, for example, Gateway. I mean, there's probably a lot of work that happens in June that we don't have that bill recorded yet. So moving on to 2-4, which is non-capacity, or essentially all the aspects of our capital plan that are not our new schools funded through impact fees. So I know it's a little bit small, but I did want to talk
Thank you for putting it
through.
all on one page.
Did want to talk, and if you look at it on the computer, you can obviously zoom in. So, one thing up at the top under estimated revenues, going back to our different funding sources and buckets and what's funding what. On the half-penny program, we have moved forward with the planning for the comprehensive renovations for Reedy Creek and Oxa, which are numbers 5 and 6 on our comprehensive renovation list. So those budgets have been established. You all have talked through that in facilities workshops, and we are moving forward with those projects. But the funding for those projects is going to trigger our need, in the time frame that we want to do it, is going to trigger our needs most likely for another bond issue. Not today, not tomorrow, but we're looking based on cash flow analysis and when construction will really start, when we'll really need the cash. It's probably going to be a little closer to about 18 months out, 12 to 24 months, give or take. We'll monitor the market, we'll monitor the timeline of those construction projects, but the plan has been that we will do another sales tax bond issue in that time frame so that we can get those projects done in that time frame. And again, that's not something that has to go out to the voters. That's just an internal board decision on when we need and want that cash sooner than we would otherwise have it, so that we can move forward with those projects. So that's on the half-penny side for the Oxa and Reedy Creek comprehensive renovations. The quarter penny goes back to the discussion about transportation. And actually, I do want to mention too, I might as well put it in here. So deferred maintenance, and Dave's back there. If you want to come up, and Dave's kind of helped lead this effort, so I'll let him speak to the extent he wants to. But we've gone through and looked at a couple key areas. So all of the deferred maintenance needs, safety and security, technology infrastructure, and transportation. Those are kind of the 4 big buckets within this. So we have taken a much more intensive look recently at the true needs in those areas and worked with the teams to prioritize those needs, knowing that the needs are greater than the funding that's available today, right? So then really working through prioritizing and most critically figuring out what's absolutely essential and critical that it happen right now, versus what can maybe wait a year or 2 or longer or isn't necessarily essential.
So,
Do you want to?
yeah, so what we did was I sat through with the operations team, maintenance especially, safety and security, to look at your facilities condition assessment. Because when I looked at the book that was passed out, we were roughly about, the estimates that were in there are roughly about $100 million of work. What that means to me is that that's work that we should have already done at some point, and as part of our cyclical maintenance that might have been behind. So what we decided to do was to look at everything, safety, security, our fire alarm systems and stuff like that, that usually fall under that department, as well as like our HVAC, our roofs, and whatever else. And what we did was we realized that we needed to prioritize, because $100 million at one time to go do work across the entire district is just not feasible. So what we did was we prioritized with both teams, and so what you're going to see proposed is roughly about $25 million worth of deferred maintenance work that we would like to do in year 1, which would be our worst systems, our worst HVAC, our worst roofs. And then you would see roughly about $20 million, I think, being proposed for year 2, year 3, year 4. The intent is that by year 5, year 6, we're caught up with that plan, and then whatever our comprehensive renovation projects are hitting those schools, we will absorb that into it. There are just some HVAC systems and some roofs or some fire alarm systems that we can't wait on the comprehensive renovation project to get around to. So we've made a deliberate effort to quantify those and bring them to you now, asking to do those.
How do you get $100 million behind on maintenance? All of our maintenance people are the same for 20 years.
So part of it is capacity. Going
But
back,
now we have $20
going
million.
back to originally, a huge part of it was funding. So if you go back to 2008-9 timeframe, I mean, every district, and I mean nationally, I mean every district across the board has major backlogs of deferred maintenance because the funding just wasn't at the levels of what we need to maintain all of our facilities.
And sorry,
no,
I'll
please, go
interject,
ahead.
Mr. Arguello. I think what I'm seeing is that our team was doing the best they could with the budgets they had to maintain. So we have our own fire alarm techs, our own HVAC techs, so we were doing those. That didn't mean that it wasn't on the deferred maintenance list saying, hey, we're past our useful life. So we had the roof on Building 2000, it was about 10 years past its useful life, and what we would typically put on paper saying that this is going to last us 25 years. And that's because they went in and for maybe like $50,000, they recoded the roof rather than did a full replacement. So there are a lot of those projects. You know, there are roof on like schools that are the prototypes like the not Denjon, but Mill Creek or Lakeview, those metal roofs that have been coated over twice already. And what that does, you know, it increases the lifespan maybe like 5-7 years. Doesn't necessarily mean that the end result is a full replacement. And I think that's what's being carried over time, and we're trying to make sure that we do the right kind of investment, because technically we can go recode that roof, but I might be really worried about walking on it because it's metal under a plastic coating. So I think we're looking at both. I'm with you. We do have $100 million, which might not have been the best. You know, our team.
Here's the thing, all of that is something that you foresee. Metal roofs are not, they have the same lifespan no matter what all over the world, all right? So if it's 25 years, it's 25 years, and if you code it's gonna be 7, and you know that you're gonna have that expenditure at some point down the line. There's no way that you get $100 million behind on deferred maintenance, which is by definition, it's deferred maintenance, right?
Right.
Unless you literally, it's not ignored maintenance.
No, it's not.
So $100 million is a gigantic sum to get behind, and it hasn't been brought up for 2 years, the 2 years that I've been here.
Well, I just want to back up for a second for the other part of what I was going to say. You know, I just kind of rewound a little too far maybe, but, you know, funding was everybody got hugely backlogged on deferred maintenance.
Yeah, but there should be no surprise.
But-
That's the issue. Is that
Well, they're not.
yeah, right.
This is not the first time we've been having this conversation. We've been having this conversation for years. But when we got the half penny sales tax program passed in 2016, we had deferred maintenance at that level back then. And so that's part of the reason why we wanted to go ahead and jumpstart Michigan Ave, St. Cloud Middle, and Denjon. That's part of the reason we did that first bond issue, was so that we could really jumpstart and start to get a handle on that deferred maintenance, along with critical HVAC systems at the time. So the dollar amount every year, I mean, it's going to keep adding to it. I mean, every year you have new things that become another year older, right? So you're never going to say, all right, it's $100 million today. Our goal is to be done with that tomorrow, right? I mean, it's constantly being added to at the same time that you're trying to tackle things. But I was just going to say, you know, Dave mentioned that we've allocated $25 million for the current year and $20 million for the out years, based on the most recent conversations we've had about our needs. The last several years, really back since we started the sales tax program, we've been in about the $6 to $8 million a year, up to $10 million a year, is what Cavaney and the team have really been doing in the deferred maintenance area, with the exception of the major comprehensive renovations. And part of that, what I said about capacity, part of that is because I've gone to him and said, how much, regardless of money, if I could give you $100 million tomorrow, regardless of money, how much of this work can we realistically accomplish in the upcoming year, either with in-house resources or with going to external contractors. But so that's kind of where we've been the last couple of years. And then obviously, Dave's response is a lot more about the detail of what we're doing and why.
And what we're doing essentially is facilities is stepping in to offer help. So the larger projects that we have prioritized, if we have multiple HVAC projects, then we have the ability of bundling those as one project. We
Lower
can-
cost.
Right, and manage them as one project, and then we can put a project manager that doesn't take away our maintenance team from actually doing true maintenance. And so what you're going to see is that we're going to work a lot closer together, trying to help our operations folks get their projects. We're no longer just a design and construction department that focuses on renovations for schools, but we're going to be assisting operations, because I fully expect that all of the fire alarms that we have to replace, because they require design and permitting and stuff, and the value of those is that facilities is going to step in with Lester and his team to provide support to get those projects done.
How are you looking at it to some of those comprehensive projects like the Reedy Creek? Like, does something worry you to do an HVAC now that's big that could affect
So
eventual
so that's a really good question. So yes, so we realized that Reedy Creek has a chiller that is on its last leg. The question came up because we're planning the comprehensive. Hey, what do we do? Do you want us to defer? Well, maintenance is saying that they can't wait on our timeline. So what we're going to do is we're sizing the chiller now. We'll buy the chiller. It'll be on site, but it'll be picked up and put in the permanent location for the new building when it comes online. So yes, we're absolutely working together to make sure that those are scoped and phased properly.
Like, pretend that you're building the school now.
Correct. Yep.
And like, whatever the capacity needs of the new school are, get that same chiller, so you're not replacing the chiller. So now
Yes,
you're
sir.
just kind of moving it, so to speak.
Essentially, when the building comes online, the chiller is probably a year or two older, but old. It's not a brand new chiller, but it's done so that we can maintain our operations right now, but we can also use it on the new school, new building. It's a new building. That's our proposal.
But I wanted to make sure that the board has the true visibility into what the needs are, not just here's how much we're allocating and funding, but here's really what the needs are. Here's how much we've gone ahead and allocated again in this first version, looking for feedback. But going back to the comment about a bond issue in the upcoming year or two, on the half penny, that is something that we want to be thinking about in order to really tackle more of this in a quicker time frame. Do we look at bonding some additional money or upping the value of that? And how quickly do we want to be able to fund that existing list of what's out there? So the actual list that was submitted was about 29 million for the current year. So that's kind of something to think about. We just somewhat arbitrarily, we're trying to balance priorities between that and all these other areas, right? But one of the things that we talked to Calvin about this morning, and we can kind of think about and speak to as we talk about all the other priorities as well, is are there things on that deferred maintenance list that are absolutely critical and that we need to prioritize more funding in that area going into next year? Again, that in conjunction with transportation needs, with technology needs, with security needs, but where do all of those priorities kind of balance themselves out? So that's the deferred maintenance piece. I did want to say, as far as the safety and security piece, the requests that we received from Lester and his team were over the next 5 years, were somewhat around $4 million a year, give or take. So we went ahead and allocated that. That's definitely an area where I think all of the needs that were submitted were very valid and definitely things that we want to make sure we're addressing. So we have allocated $4 million a year to safety and security.
And the ERP, I saw that 5 million was already allocated in 23-24, right? So that's part of the savings when you talk about carryover. So
that money's
so
sitting
we have 5 million there.
Very
now.
good point.
So next year it's going to be 10.
That's what
So we're
that's
basically
the carryover
pre-funding.
concept.
We're
setting
pre-funding
the money aside, but it hasn't been spent yet.
Correct.
So when you think about the general fund and we talk about carryovers, it's exactly that concept.
Absolutely. So now we're not starting from scratch or figuring out where, because we know the ERP is coming. We kind of pre-set aside money ahead of time to be able to take care of it when we need
Right, and I know that was something that was very important that we started last year. So we started last year with the first 5 million, and then we have another 5 million slotted in for the next 4 years. We may need to go ahead and slot a little bit more in there. But again, as of right now, we've started that process of allocating that money.
Can't do ERP on the cheap.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm picking apart here for just a moment. So it says Canoe Creek K renovation. I thought we were done with some of that.
Is it probably just final
Renovation.
closeout? Yeah, the 39,000 is just final closeout.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, bringing that back, the projects that are almost finished. Right.
Yeah.
We still have to carry over, but the money's out there because we haven't, we audit every GMP.
Yeah.
And so we look for that, make sure that sometimes we get money back from our contractors because their insurances might have been less than they originally projected in their GMP or something like that, so we look for everything.
So, and you wait until after that's complete before you do a final reconciliation?
Yes.
Okay.
So, no, there is a final reconcile one that comes to the board, yes, before with our change order, but our audit comes in after that.
Got it.
We audit everything.
Okay, got it.
Mr. Kienberger has a.
Dave, the deferred maintenance, is that prioritized? Remember, we had $1 zillion deferred, RJ, and Cove Committee said we want all the buildings sealed from leaks, elements, et cetera, and then they prioritized what would be the maintenance that was updated, so that it was like the most critical to the least critical. Have we done that?
Yes. That is how we came up with these budgets.
It is, but then the priority one was like $29 million for this year. So
Yeah, I mean.
within that,
You don't do it.
That is what, I think that's essentially how we ended up at where
At the
we're
20.
at, right?
Can we just look at that list then and just defer it over so we can look over?
Yeah, our
so if
facilities
you
can-
go.
'Cause I'm just curious of how much of that is going to be remodeled versus not being remodeled.
So the detail of what we've funded is in the packet, so that's there, but as far as the additional,
Just the deferred maintenance,
So-
the backlog itself.
oh, the
The
detail.
itemization.
The detail of the 25 million that would be planned for next year is in the packet. I think
I'm
what
talking
you're
about the
asking for,
overall
like, the
100.
whole facility
Yeah, because
condition
like when you looked at
assessment
it, you
list.
said you like, it's
Yeah.
kind of like picking what was the
So
priority.
I want to share this as well. One of the, similarly to what we would do with the chiller at Reedy Creek. If we go into a school because our roof is critical, let's say, use Lakeview as an example, and we replace the roof, whenever we get around for a comprehensive renovation at Lakeview, that'll be captured in our e-builder system as part of our capital improvements already. So it will not be included as part of the comprehensive renovation. Instead, what we'll do is just focus on the rest of things that might not be as critical as the roof is right now. In case what I'm trying to understand is, there won't be any crossover or double work done. It's just we would replace our HVAC system so we wouldn't have to touch that, or something to that extent. We'll really focus on just a facelift of the building instead. But we can absolutely give you the list.
Right. And I'm just, whatever, you can't control interest rates. I guess you want to time it, because like, man, interest rates are the highest they are right
As
now.
far as the bond issue?
Yeah.
That's definitely part of it, is keeping an eye on the market. The other part of it, though, is that you don't, so for sales tax bonds, the intent is that the amount of money that you take down will be spent within about a 3-year period. So you don't want to do a bond issue today for a project where we're not really going to spend the majority of that money for 3 to 5 years out.
So
So
we're not
that's
so we're not
why,
extending ourselves too much. It's just like a bridge loan, so to speak.
right.
So we
Right.
are going to collect that money.
Correct.
So is that really a savings then? Because if we're going to collect that money in 3 years.
We're not
then
going to
yeah,
collect the money in 3 years. We're going to pay it back most likely over 20. You can pay it back over 10 to 30 years. So most likely over about 20 years, we would pay it back.
Oh, okay, that's what I was
over.
gonna say, like, what is the 3? Because I thought because the way you explained it was like, okay, we get the money and we're paying it
We're
off
not,
in 3
the
years, and we get 3 year
the
note.
point is, we're not going to collect that much money that quickly.
But they give it to you in trenches or something like that? So you get a loan and like, you get the bond gives you the
No,
money?
the bond we would, without bonding, we wouldn't be generating that sales tax revenue quickly enough to get these projects done now.
Right.
So that's the purpose of bonding. But yes, to answer your question, once we bond, we get all that money on day one.
Yeah, you get it on day one.
With the
Mm.
intent that you spend it within 3 years.
Oh, I see what you're saying, spend the money you
Spend it.
collected in 3 years, not pay off the value of
Spend
the
the
bond.
bond proceeds in
You get
3
to
years.
spend the
Correct.
proceeds over 10 years, so it's like, kind of like, that's where you get the benefit is that.
So you're spending the proceeds within 3 years, but then you're making those debt payments back over a longer period of time as the revenue's coming in.
Correct. And you can't do that longer than the life of the sales tax, right? Because the sales tax.
Correct,
like if
because
the
you have to
sales
have that
tax is-
revenue source coming in.
Yeah, so they won't allow you to extend payments beyond when the expiration date or the
Correct.
sunset of that sales tax.
Correct. Because there has to be a guaranteed revenue source that's going to be able to make those repayments. Yeah.
Okay. All right, can we beat that up?
No. What? Oh, yeah, I was going to talk about that next. Okay, okay. So next we want to talk about the quarter penny and the transportation needs. So before we get into the facilities, just wanted to mention that we have allocated $6 million a year for school bus replacements. You'll see $5 million in here. We also have $1 million in impact fees each year because we can, to the extent that it's student growth and additional students that we're transporting, we can use impact fees for that as well. So we have allocated $1 million there, $5 million out of the quarter penny sales tax. And that gets us pretty close to what RB says his needs are for the next 2 to 3 years. After that, out there, the cost starts increasing and, we'll need to start looking then at additional cost of bus replacements, but we've gone ahead and held that flat for this 5-year plan right now. The other piece of transportation is White Fleet. We've set that White Fleet budget at $750,000 a year. Again, based on some discussions with the team about what needs are currently today. And that's how we came up with the $750,000 of what today's needs are that we thought were realistic. Again, that's coming out of the quarter penny sales tax. So then the big piece is the new transportation facilities. And just for Dr. Shanoff's benefit too, going back about a year or so, I guess, we started talking, or maybe more, we have one main transportation facility today over on Simpson Road next to the health center that you got to visit. So we had started conversations about a transportation east and a transportation west. At the time that those conversations started, the budgets for those projects were $22 million and $24 million. Over the course of the next 6 months or so, those budgets basically doubled. During that time period when all the construction costs were skyrocketing. So we kind of put a pause and said, from a funding perspective, let's talk about which one we want to move forward with first. The decision's been made, we're moving forward with Transportation East, but Transportation West now is still kind of sitting out there, planned for. We have the land, we have the design.
The design
We have the
already
design, we have the desire, but we need to discuss how we fund it, priority about funding it, et cetera. So as of today, it's just kind of on hold, but the conversation will be if and when this board wants to potentially do a bond issue against our quarter penny sales tax revenue, we could, that is an option. We could do that to be able to go ahead and pull the trigger on moving forward with the Transportation West facility. So I just think that's something, if and when the board would want to move forward with that, just know that that's how the funding for that project would need to happen. And I believe, did you say the updated budget on that is $58 million? So that's what we're talking about. We bring in, just
We
for,
don't have budgets coming down yet.
which is why I'm not sitting here today recommending to you that we move forward with that right now.
We did adjust some downwards based on what we learned from our prototypes and correcting things. But the Transportation West facility was on our books to be wrapping up design this year and starting construction sometime towards the end of this year with the expectation of opening in 2025. That's because of the amount of work for the road and access and all that stuff that needs to be done. So I think what we're saying is we're laying out the options to the board. The options are, if we're continuing to use our quarter penny sales taxes to bond and build it, or we can, if we defer it, then our design just sits on the shelf. until.
So just for the perspective that we're bringing in about $18 million a year right now in the quarter
What's the
penny.
lifespan on each of those right now currently? I know which one was just.
On the penny. The half penny was approved in 2016 and goes through 2036. The quarter penny was just approved in 2022, or extended in 2022 for another 20 years.
20, okay.
So to 42.
There's still a court case pending on that, though,
Attorney, can you speak to that?
I'm unaware of any case that we've been named in.
No, for the tax. The quarter
The
penny, we
county-
don't need to be named in, it's the county that got
The county
named.
may still be dealing with it. They have not updated me or told me anything about it.
But it impacts us. If they
In
get,
Texas, if they
yeah.
lose, they were very confident they wouldn't. I'm just telling you what they said. If I hear anything else, I'll let you know.
So that's transportation, and then the last main category I want to talk to you about was technology infrastructure. And I want to give Pete an opportunity if there's anything he wants to speak to, because that is an area where where a lot of needs submitted that we haven't necessarily allocated funding for. Not because it's the lowest priority, but again, things that maybe aren't absolutely essential that the funding be allocated this year. And because I'm saying that, I really do want to give Pete the opportunity to speak to anything that he would like to.
For
So.
page 27, just making clear where we're at.
Sorry, I'm still just speaking from this, but yes, the rest of the document is all the detail on individual items. So yes, 2-7 is the carryover, and then 2-8 is really the new money that would be allocated for next year.
So our biggest concern right now is technology refresh coming up in the next couple of years. As you know, we purchased a large number of computers a couple of years ago at the start of the pandemic. We went 1-to-1, so that refresh will be coming up in stages. That's going to be happening. We have an opportunity for the board to consider leasing at that time when that comes up. So in the past, that's kind of been not something we wanted to explore really in the past, but the last contract we did with our manufacturers and our provider, which is UDT, we built in an option for leasing to lease computers and to have them take care of them for us as a group.
Would the
So-
lease, I'm sorry,
Yes, sir.
would the lease include like insurance in our case they break them and things like that? Because if we lease them and these kids break them.
Right. So that's an option we can put on. So for right now, we're talking about the care and feeding of them, getting them ready for distribution, dropping them at the school sites. This is a model that Volusia County uses, and I believe Orange County has the option to do it right now, to do the same thing. But the company we work with will actually prepare those computers and drop them at the school for us. They take care of them, they image them, they do all that stuff. So with kind of segueing back to ESSER and ARP, we have a lot of folks who are funded by those programs. This would be an opportunity to shift some of those costs at that time. And they take those devices off of our hands when we're done with that in the future. So that is just an option. I know in the past, we like to own our stuff. So I get that and we surplus it. But this is an opportunity for us to at least explore that. We set a threshold of approximately, 7,500 devices, Sean, is where that would trigger a leasing option. And that's coming up. That'll come up in the next 2 years.
So to be honest with Dr. Shanoff, that's where I kind of lean on you a little bit, because at the end of the day, there's really no need to own a device that's going to die in 3 or 4 years. You know what I mean?
So-
So we're constantly going to be refreshing. You
So,
know, so at that point, it's like, it's
We're
just.
counting on 5 years.
so, yeah, 5 years is a typical, refresh. I'll tell you that, yeah, and then you want to build out your refresh at 20% is fairly standard for the industry. This is a lot like buying a car. It's a depreciating asset the moment that you drive it off the lot. So the moment that you power on a new computer, it begins to depreciate, and quite honestly, that technology becomes outdated. The idea behind having a lease I think actually speaking to Mr. Thorne's reasons, when you talk about the amount of support that you have for your technology program right now, and knowing where the funding sources are for that particular support model, you really need to rethink and reimagine what things are going to look like when that model no longer exists because the funding is no longer there for it, which is where the lease option really does come into play. Are students still accountable for ensuring that the device is well cared for? Yes. Are there options that we can even look at with the reseller on how we might actually look to protect those devices? Yes. So there are different things that we can build in to help kind of mitigate maybe some of the costs associated with device breakage or loss. But at the end of the day, it is a full-service solution that will image, repair, in a lot of cases, collect, and deliver.
So we save on that manpower.
There is a tremendous cost savings that we can monetize the amount of manpower that would be saved through a lease option. Yes.
Can I interject and say to you, what is this, what are you talking about here looking like? I'm putting on the teacher lens in the classroom. We're not talking about doing away with tech support at the school level, correct?
No.
Okay, good, because that's vital for instruction to have smart boards and other things.
No.
Now, we may reconfigure how that looks because of the payment models right now
Right.
for those folks. So
Yeah.
we may go to a triad model or something like that where we have people floating around schools based on like a heat map of where the biggest problems are. So that's something that we're looking at in preparation for the year after next.
Right.
It would actually provide more support because they're no longer having to deal with the imaging and a lot of the repair issues, that they can really focus in on really kind of delivering the support to the classroom.
Okay.
We just simply wanted to provide that option because we knew what we were getting into at the time when we went on DeWan.
Right.
We saw this avalanche coming at it in the future.
Well, I understand that outsourcing, I'm just making sure
End of life.
everything we're talking about outsourcing here doesn't include that.
The schools will have tech.
Yeah.
For sure.
Now, where does the refresh come from? Does that come from general
So
revenue
that's-
dollars or capital
So
dollars?
that's in here, that's
Considered-
coming from capital dollars, and it's coming from our 1.5, our capital outlay tax, which, before we move on from that conversation, so we've allocated $2.4 million a year to student computers, which Pete's saying is gonna get us through the next 3 years or so. It's really that like third or fourth year when that refresh cycle is gonna kick in and
We have
we'll need
refresh
to
that's
talk about.
which that money covers.
Yeah.
Like, so we have older model Dell computers that are coming to end of life that need to be replaced. So,
So that is in
gotta have
here.
that built in.
So that's in here as,
Because you know, like we do with the
From the
ERP,
1.5
like when
mil.
ERP was coming, we pre-funded it. Are we setting aside dollars for that eventual refresh?
this is just the amount we need every single year.
Right.
And at these conferences where they discuss the leasing plan that Pete is talking about, you've got more knowledgeable of what your cost is gonna be every year because you get on that.
Because it's
cycle.
predictable.
Right
Yeah.
now, we're in that odd time that we didn't start it yet, but we've got to replace what we own and so forth. So it just gives you that consistency more for your budget of what it's gonna cost.
We're just trying to be deliberate about this
Yeah.
and not have any surprises for the board.
And then, I guess the last component of that, would they refresh the device? If it's under release, and let's say it gets older, they need like a new hardware, would they replace that? Or is that only replacing devices every 3 years? How often do they give us a new device because it's a lease?
It'd be 4 to 5 years.
Those are terms that are all negotiable through the lease
Depends how we
process.
structure that lease.
Right.
Like I said, it's just an option that's there for us to
Right.
exercise if we want.
Oh, they'll gladly go ahead and, refresh your inventory every 12 months if you want. But no, I would say that, yeah, you want something that, if you're going to purchase, typically it's a 5-year. If you lease, then you could actually look at moving up that time frame potentially. or not. It just, we can call the terms.
We also went to 3 different models to see which one is the best, actually. So we have Lenovo, we have HP, and we have Dell currently. So that is the new model that's the new type of model we went to for this.
What was your conclusion? Dell?
I'm sorry.
All three now are options.
We're going to, we have 3 now.
You
So
have
we-
3 now, but you didn't conclude as to which one was best, or?
No, we're still looking at that. So we did a new device contract about a year and a half ago. So we wanted to have multiple models in there to see, because we were strictly a Dell shop before that. And because of different reasons, especially with supply chain and stuff like that was happening, we wanted to get away from being tied into one manufacturer at the time. And we were dealing with Dell directly at that time. So we were having ordering issues and things. And now that's kind of been put aside. We now have 3 models at schools where we can order for students too. So we have a balance of computers from all 3 manufacturers right now out in the field at our schools for our students.
And from a timeliness perspective, that actually is a good way to do it. Coming from a shop that only had 1 device, the concern sometimes is that if you go with one manufacturer and you're already a customer, they're not necessarily looking at you and your business, they're looking at new business. Sometimes that part availability will be held for new business. So want to make sure that you kind of spread that risk out. At least now, while supply chains are still rather tight with parts for those computers.
How does that impact the breakage issue? Because I know it does. I mean, a lot of these computers never make it to that outdated
So
time
right
frame.
now, the model is, if it's under warranty, it goes to Quantum, which is one of our partners, and they fix them under warranty, or we fix them at our computer shop. We actually do that. So right now, we're floating right around 3.6% damage rate currently, which is pretty low, actually, compared to a lot of districts. So about
Constant 3.6%, or it's 3%?
It fluctuates. It
And,
fluctuates.
and is that like, what about ones that are completely ruined?
We do have those that are, maliciously damaged or destroyed. So when that happens, hopefully the parent has signed a form and we go and we try to collect on that when that happens. So we do send out letters for those occasions, but it doesn't happen that often.
That breakage rate is actually very good.
Yeah.
So up until today, I would be jealous of that. So
Now you can be proud of it.
now I can be very proud of it. Now I'm owning it. Thank
I'm
you.
surprised by it, actually.
So am I.
And it does fluctuate between iPads and laptops,
Yep, yep.
because we're a Windows laptop shop, and we also have iPads for K and first grade. So that's what they use. And we have varying rates of damage. I would say it's not the same in each school. It does fluctuate. But we keep pretty good statistics on what's damaged, what's out for repair, for warranty. I'll tell you, the biggest thing we see is broken screens. That's really the biggest thing. Because, a child may leave a pencil in the laptop, they shut it and cracked, right? They don't know, it's not malicious, it was an accident. Right. So we're experimenting with different types of repair methodologies too. We're also looking at possibly the schools having their own, having kids sign up for their own warranty if they want. Because right now, when we first started the one-to-one, we had a warranty program, but we were paying twice what it was costing for us to repair stuff. So we stopped that and saved about $1 million doing that. I think we chatted about it during one of the board meetings, but so we're exploring different avenues because one-to-one for us is still brand new, really, right? We're just getting ready to start our 3rd year, so we're still learning. We're still building into our culture from a parent and a student standpoint, and a staff standpoint, really, too. We're still getting ourselves wrapped around the process. So I think we're doing a good job.
Is there a way to transfer the responsibility to the parent through ownership. For example, if it's a 5-year process of this item, right? Then you give it to them in the first grade and they keep it until 5th grade or whatever, and then at the same time it transfers ownership. The parent knows, maybe they even make some kind of nominal payment over those 5 years so that it belongs to them, even if they pay $10 a year, just nominal.
We've looked at possibly having,
Set up a program like that.
we've looked at possibly having a district-wide, insurance program, that the parents can buy into. But right now, we're looking at it by school. So some schools have interest, some don't, like Neo City does it, for example. There's others too, right, Sean? I believe that do it.
Well, I guess with the breakage rate that low, then it may not be an issue, right? But I know other districts are really suffering much larger numbers than that.
Oh, yeah, so there are some schools that have large rates of damage, like Kissimmee Middle, for example. That's one where we're looking at stuff. I think there's high rates of breaking to Liberty High School, places like that. But then we have some very low ones too, where no one breaks anything. Some of the elementary schools are very, very good. Very good with that. So it all equals
Come up
out.
with like an incentive program.
Always elementary school.
But we can show you statistics by school, which is very nice, actually.
And that's what I was talking about earlier. We'll talk about, when we talk about a strategic plan, by creating a scorecard for each school, I think that, that's an element that we look at.
I mean, as a former CIO, I can just say that the diligence from Pete and his team, having that type of visibility into breakage rates and those types of things, it's uncommon to be at that level after 10 years of that environment, let alone 3. So it's impressive.
It's just something that's down top of it, because we don't want to see it,
It can get out of control very quickly.
Please know, though, that every parent does sign a form. So, and there's 3 statutes on that form that they're responsible for, actual state statutes, that we can hold them to for recovery when that happens.
But there's no good way,
No.
Right. That's true. But at least we have a document. We do. So I would say refresh is probably one of the biggest items. I think I've always said that's like number 1, right? But other areas is security, making sure we stay on top of that. So there's security concerns that we're constantly looking at. We're constantly looking at better, cheaper, more encompassing types of software and programs to protect our district. So I'd say cyber is very, very important also. And I know we have some.
And we have, going back to page 2.8, we've allocated the additional $10 million next year for technology. But again, Pete, if you can kind of scrub this back to your list, and if there's anything truly, truly essential that has not been added in here, let us know. Okay, definitely get with me on that tomorrow or tonight. All right, want to make sure we're not excluding anything that truly is essential moving into next year, so. The last thing I just wanted to mention on capital, you're probably all aware that the charter, the 1.5 mils sharing with charter schools bill passed this year and is going to be phased in over a 5-year period. So that has been added into our plan now. It's the 3rd line down under appropriations, kind of near the top on page 2.4. And so our initial projection for the upcoming year is that that'll be just over $1 million. But by year 5, that'll grow to 12.6 million and continue to grow. So that is that 1.5 mils that charter schools have not historically participated in. They've had their separate PICO charter capital funding source, but with the passage of that bill this session, that is now what this will look like, phased in over the 5-year period. So, just want to keep that in mind. That is something new that's in the plan that you haven't seen before. So, and with that, that's all we had on capital. Did want to talk a little bit about ARP unless anybody had any further capital conversation. Dr. Lamar, do you want to come up and speak a little bit? Dr. Lamar, our Director of Special Programs and the art queen. She has put together this additional handout for you, so I wanted to let her speak to it.
On the first column, you'll see this was the original art budget that was written and submitted about 2 years ago for ESSER 3 funding. This is the final of the three. We had ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. ESSER 2 is ending this coming September 30th, and ESSER 3, this is the one that we're looking at, will end September 30th of '24. So several of these items have shifted, and if you look, I don't know if you have any questions specifically, but as Mr. Thorne just said, we do have a lot of salaries that are in this funding source right now, and those will sunset in September.
Just so I understand, where the balance means that we haven't spent it yet, right? It's allocated, but.
This is the original budget.
So the 109 million is the
Right.
total of that grant.
Right, on the graphic chart here, you can
Is it
see.
total, right?
Yeah.
But out of that 109, how much is left? Because when I see the word balance at the top, does that mean, how much of it is left over that hasn't been spent yet, that we need to spend before the grant expires?
It's the
Sorry, I'm
red.
trying to-
So it's at-
I know, I can't see.
23 points. I have a bigger
part
one
at the
here.
top.
You have a bigger one?
This here shows where.
Okay.
23 million.
Okay. Yeah, and as a quick example, because the reason why I asked that question was, like, on one of the line items I read, like, say, laptops, 1.6 million. How much did we spend for that? Because here we are talking about leasing. Why spend the grant money to buy laptops when we're going to lease, when we could reallocate that money somewhere else and spend down? I mean, just being a little bit more strategic
not-
with the final allocation.
We're not leasing yet, and even if you were leasing, you'd have to pay for it.
No, what I'm saying, though, but
You're
let,
saying don't spend it now.
but don't spend is what I'm saying. Don't buy the computers that are not going to be, that's not part of our plan. Spend it on something else, and then you could, like, you could play the shell game. I mean, legally play the shell game. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, spend on something else that you need, because why buy something when we're going to be leasing pretty soon, when you're just, you get what I'm saying?
But that's the conversation about, are we about to start leasing tomorrow? Because if not, we have to have this
Leasing
plan.
Conversation, when
Yeah.
was the year, what year?
In a couple of years.
Yeah,
A couple
so-
years out.
So the benefit to going ahead and using the money to buy it now is that you can actually put off the start of the leasing process. You go ahead, you utilize the dollars now, you can actually push out the leasing option.
in waves anyways.
Correct.
Of when things are.
So we're not going to, we're not at lease at 100% rate anyway.
No.
We're going to lease and.
No, as we retire devices, then you go ahead and you onboard that percentage in leases.
Okay.
So it's one of the important things to remember about these ESSER 3 funds, and they keep sending the same message from Florida Department of Ed, is these were intended to help with learning loss from COVID. And we can't steer too far off of that goal. And
What are the established frameworks for that?
I'm sorry?
What are the established frameworks for that? For example, do you know something that has been called?
Denied?
Yeah, too far?
I do. Several of the visual and performing arts requests that have been put in twice, once in ESSER 2 and then again in this ESSER 3.
Which was what?
We were just informed. Additional supplemental teaching supplies or supplies for teachers, an Osceola Rock camp-type program they wanted to do, the START program.
I had talked to them actually at the START camp, and one of them was even trying to do some therapy for students around art therapy, and that was even denied, so.
Right. Anything to do with social emotional learning is gone. So they're actually, hate to say it, questioning the theming right now, and they wanted to deny it all. And I politely said, this was originally approved in our original ARP grant, and then it was attempted to move to a different art. Now we're just trying to put it back into the original. So they are going to go back to the original people. Everyone's shifted up at Florida, and and trying to get us an exception, but we don't even know if that's going to get approved again.
When you say theming, for what, for the camp?
For the choice and charter schools. The theme-
So,
Just the choice programming, the new choice programming that we
so the
advertise.
additional programs that we're offering, because,
The additional programs, moving into the middle school
Yeah.
and elementary school.
what's their reason for denying it?
Well, the originally, everything was, you have to put everything really specific with object codes and funding sources, and it came in, it was all in 5100, which is supplies. And then they asked us to go back and be more specific and detail it all out, which is what we did. It's all very nicely detailed out, and then we resubmitted it. And now they're saying, no, they didn't want to approve it. So we're trying to, I'm in discussions with them to say, you initially did approve it. You asked us to spread it out. We spread it out, and now we're going back. And so they're working with higher level people to see if they will.
So is there approval, I'm sorry, Mr. Arguello?
No, go ahead.
Is there approval denial based on the program? Is it based on we did it incorrectly? Is it a technical issue?
They're saying it's not related enough to learning loss from COVID.
Okay, I understand.
That's
Thank
the
you.
reason.
That's what I wanted to get to.
Right.
Can you give us
it-
an example of one of those programs?
Only. So for example, in middle school where we're adding the Paxton Patterson Lab for the career exploration option in the elective, they wanted us to spread out.
Well, a specific one, at a specific school.
Identify, so Dan John Middle School has a multimedia, media production type course that they are adding. And they wanted them to identify the actual content and all of the equipment that would be part of that elective class and program. And not all of that falls under a 5100 object, function and object code. Some of those things, there are some that are STEM, robotics.
So it's fair though, right? It's their base, that's not really related necessarily to learning loss. We could maybe make a case for it, but on its surface, there's reasoning behind the rejection, right? So what would?
The original grant was approved though.
Yeah, but I mean, in the end, further review, I wouldn't be shocked, right?
I think where we are now, though,
It-
to move forward, because we got a little bit of time. That clock is off. I keep
know,
looking at
I
that
already
clock.
made a note
I'm
to
like,
push that
It's
clock.
been, yeah.
So we have
It's been like
$23
that
million,
since I interviewed
kill me.
of which the goal is learning loss.
Correct.
Okay.
I wonder where-
That is
Yeah, he
Well,
broke it.
I think the one question this board may want to know, especially now for the board cycle, is the remaining 23 million that's left unspent. Can we get a plan for what that is? Because do we have the opportunity as a board
Or
to sit
can we
there and say,
discuss
we
better yet?
prioritize
Oh, yes,
it? Yeah.
yes.
Where do we
Right?
want
I
to
mean,
spend?
absolutely.
Where do we want to
$23 million
spend?
is
Where do we want to
It's
spend the
a chunk of
leftover?
change, yeah.
Yeah, that's, so we need to
With
just
the-
have a
with the
conversation, a
focus
workshop
that-
on the
with
$23 million
focus,
maybe
it
worth
has to be-
it.
Yeah, because this is a little bit confusing. It doesn't, I want to see like this lined up. Like, what does staff recommend to spend the 23 million on? And then let the board go, okay, do we like it, we do not like it? Do we want to like play the shell game of where we move it?
just current,
That was
buckets
what
where
was
it
the
was
original
put.
plan that was approved. That
Correct.
was just.
but
the
it does,
original
it's not
plan.
showing us where it's been spent
Yeah,
to
what's the
date in
remaining?
those buckets.
Right, and since then, when we're talking about learning loss from COVID, we have a lot of other grants, sub-grants sitting around that are specific to like reading K-3, tutoring, summer school. So those are all over in here.
On top of this or within this?
On top of this, on top of this. So we have those buckets sitting around too. And so it's really looking at a big whole collectively, and then, but this is the biggest pot, this one right here. And so we've been intentionally trying to obviously spend down the other ones because they expire first, but now moving forward,
I just think
There
it's
is
fair
a-
because of the timing issue. If the next board meeting, we can look at the unallocated portions and what does you guys plan to spend it on? We could look at that and give you the A-OK and say, hey, it's great, or 90% of it's okay, maybe we'd want to like,
Well, I mean, maybe we have a workshop and we have the department heads come and make proposals that we
Like a
can,
SAC meeting.
Well, because
And the 23 million is already in this 109 million here.
I understand, but I don't see where, carve it out, what's left over, what hasn't been spent left.
We still have opportunity
In
to
all
potentially
fairness,
shift.
We will have a better idea once the entire summer school program is over, because we're still trying to wrap that up. Thursday is the last big day, and then we still have some high school programs going on in July, and some other programs, some other little tutoring programs. So we do have some time. I think the next board meeting's in 2 weeks. I don't think we need to do it that quickly.
No, I just want to make sure, 'cause I don't want to
Right.
start spending it, and oh, it's too late, we
But
can't say where to go,
I
it's already spent.
completely agree that it is best to really have a real discussion about how to spend it.
And can we get a breakdown here where it said at the bottom of each of these columns? I'm not a huge fan of where it says miscellaneous, especially when it's like $1.2 million just under our miscellaneous, just to see where that is.
The 522,000?
Yes, and on the second, one, just where, when it comes, if we do have a more in-depth discussion, just what that
We
miscellaneous.
could, it's probably some really small amounts, like that said 8,000 for this or 7,000 for this, but absolutely, it all has to be allocated to the penny. And you'll notice on the pie charts, there's a portion there for charter schools. And some of the charter schools like to hold on to the money till the very, very end. And so if they decide at some point that they don't want to spend their portion, they notify us, it comes back, and then we have to reallocate it out and get approval.
I just want,
to add it in.
I'm not gonna look at the charters, I doubt if they're gonna give money back.
But we should have a backup plan in case we get it back from the charters. Because a lot of times they do give it back. They do. So all of a sudden it could be, oh, here's another $500,000 we just got back from charter. What's our
Well,
plan B?
then you're the charter lady, right? Or at least for right now.
So the reason they give it back is because they have to front load.
No, I'm just saying, can you look at their expenditure plans and see, do they have it all allocated, intending to spend it? If they have anything that's left over that they don't plan on spending,
Right.
so that we know ahead of time.
Then they'll let us know. But sometimes they say, yes, we're going to spend, we're going to spend, we're going to spend, we're going to spend, and then they never do. And then it comes back to us at the last minute.
And the reason they don't is because they have to front the money and they don't have the money to front it to get reimbursed.
It's a reimbursement process.
And it's large amounts of money at any given time, and they have to go through that whole invoice and reimbursement process. And that's just the way it's structured across the state. That's not a Osceola thing.
I think that it would be great if we could find some way to spend that money in some type of investment framework that generates revenue as much as it helps students with the learning loss. Because then we're creating a program that has reoccurring dollars that we can continue to fund in some way, shape, or form. I'm not sure how, but when he's talking about shell games, I'm just thinking, $23 million can potentially generate a lot of revenue for some kind of long-standing program instead of a panicked expenditure of money, like a game
Right.
show.
I understand what Stan, what
I'm
you're saying.
thinking kind of some stuff.
Oh, sorry. These are federal dollars, and federal dollars, my understanding, is not allowed to generate revenue.
Yeah. Well, as a consequence, right? If I buy, let's continue that discussion. I mean, you guys can tell me no. I'm gonna try. You can. But I understand that it can intentionally generate revenue.
Well, I definitely want to hear what you're thinking separately. But that's all we had for today, unless there's any questions or anything else that the board wanted to cover right now. We will move forward with putting together the superintendent's proposed full budget with all funds, including debt service, all the grants, our health insurance, and other self-insurance programs, and then that will be part of your July 11th board packet as an information-only item. Any other, we'll
It is a deferred
work on
maintenance
what you've
project.
asked for.
Our first project, they got knocked out.
Now it's $99 million.
Does anyone else want a bigger one?
Thank you.